Before we begin, a small request. If stories about second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected love mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more stories like this find the people who need them. And stay with me until the end, because the last moment of this story changes everything. The first thing she did was take his hand. Not the shy touch of a stranger. Not the trembling reach of a frightened bride meeting the man she had agreed to marry by letter. She stepped down from the wagon, lifted her chin against the hard Wyoming wind, and wrapped her fingers around Caleb Mercer's rough, work-worn hand as if she had held it 100 times before. Caleb froze. The minister was speaking. Somebody in the small crowd of ranch hands coughed. Horses shifted in the dirt. But Caleb heard none of it. He only felt the strange certainty in the way her fingers rested in his palm, steady, familiar, almost comforting. Then she looked up at him with those deep gray eyes and whispered, "Please accept this virgin bride." It was such an old-fashioned, awkward sentence that half the men standing nearby looked down at their boots to hide their surprise. Caleb couldn't speak. For 6 months he had exchanged letters with a woman named Eleanor Hart. He had never asked for a photograph. He thought that would be cruel. She had answered an advertisement he had placed in a newspaper out of Cheyenne. Widower rancher, 34, no children, honest work, harsh winters, seeking a wife willing to build a life. He had expected many things, a frightened young woman, maybe desperate, maybe practical, maybe hopeful. He had not expected this. She was not delicate. She was taller than most women he had known, broad-shouldered, plainly dressed in a simple blue traveling dress with dust on the hem. Her chestnut hair had escaped its pins from the journey. There was no polished elegance to her, no city softness. Yet there was something startlingly calm in her face. And somehow, it felt like she already knew him. Caleb cleared his throat. "Miss Hart." A faint smile touched her mouth. Yes, he should have said something welcoming. Instead, what came out was, "You've traveled a long way." "I have. And you still want to do this?" Her fingers tightened around his hand. "Yes," she said again. "I do." The minister finished the ceremony in a haze Caleb barely understood. When it was over, the ranch hands clapped awkwardly, and the cook from the bunkhouse brought out coffee and pie no one really ate. Caleb stood beside his new wife feeling like he had stepped into a life he did not entirely recognize. 3 years earlier he had buried Mary, the woman he had loved since he was 19. Fever had taken her in 4 days. After that, silence had moved into the house like a second winter. He had stopped laughing, stopped inviting people in, worked harder, spoke less. The ranch survived, but it became a place of labor, not home. Then came drought, debt, long nights at the kitchen table with unpaid bills. He had not advertised for a wife because he wanted romance. He had done it because loneliness was starting to feel permanent, and permanent loneliness frightened him more than poverty. That first night, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the house, looking around quietly. The place was bare, boots by the door, a wool coat over a chair, dishes left drying by the sink, dust in the corners, a dead clock above the fireplace. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not much for decorating." "No," she said, and there was amusement in her voice. "I suppose not." He almost smiled. At supper she moved carefully around the kitchen as if learning the shape of the room. She asked sensible questions: where the water pump was, when the nearest town market opened, how many cattle he ran, whether the winters were as bad as people claimed. He answered in short sentences. She did not seem offended. After the meal, while he stacked dishes, she said quietly, "You don't have to explain yourself." He looked over his shoulder. "What do you mean? You're afraid I'll regret coming?" He stared. "How did you know that?" Her eyes lowered to the dish towel in her hands. "Because I'm afraid of the same thing." That was the first honest thing between them. Days passed. Then weeks. Eleanor worked harder than anyone expected. She rose before dawn, learned the kitchen, the chickens, the garden patch, the accounts. She mended shirts, sharpened knives, and once helped Caleb pull a calf in the middle of a freezing rainstorm. She did not complain. The ranch hands stopped calling her the bride, and started calling her Mrs. Mercer. But there was something Caleb could not shake. It wasn't just that she had arrived with courage. It was that strange feeling of familiarity. She knew where he kept lantern oil before he showed her. Once she reached automatically for the shelf where Mary had always kept tea. Another time she stepped over the loose floorboard in the hall the very first night, though no one had warned her. At first he told himself it meant nothing. A coincidence. Then one evening he came in from the fields and found her standing before the fireplace, holding Mary's old scarf. He stopped. She turned, startled. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was cleaning the drawer. I didn't mean to." "How did you know that was hers?" She went pale. "I didn't." He stared hard at her. "Yes, you did." She set the scarf down carefully. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, "I should have told you." A cold heaviness settled in Caleb's chest. "Told me what?" Her hands trembled now, but when she met his eyes there was no deceit in them, only fear. "My older sister worked here." Caleb felt the room tilt. "What?" "Anna Hart. 8 years ago." He said her name aloud before he realized he remembered it. Anna, a young woman from Missouri who had worked as house help for nearly one summer when Caleb's mother had fallen ill. "She left," he said. "Yes. How do you know about this place?" "Because she wrote to me." The silence that followed felt louder than thunder. Eleanor swallowed. "She wrote about the ranch. About your mother. About Mary. About you." Caleb's voice hardened. "About me. She said you were good," Eleanor said. "She said grief had not touched you yet then. She said you laughed. She said when you loved someone, you did it honestly." He could barely breathe. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I was afraid you'd think I came here with some plan." "And didn't you?" Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "No, I came because I had nowhere left." That stopped him. Her voice turned quieter. "My father died 2 winters ago. Then my sister. Then the boarding house where I worked closed. I had debts. No family. No prospects. When I saw your advertisement, I recognized the name. I remembered Anna's letters. I remembered the way she described this place. It felt less frightening than stepping into the dark with a stranger." Caleb turned away. He wanted to be angry. But what he felt was not anger. It was something more confusing. Something wounded. For the next few days he became distant. Polite, but guarded. He worked late, ate quickly, slept badly. Eleanor did not press him. And that hurt more than if she had argued. One night a storm rolled over the valley. Hard wind, violent rain. Caleb was out checking the north fence when his horse stumbled in mud. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his leg. By the time he dragged himself halfway home, soaked and shivering, he could barely stand. Eleanor found him collapsing in the barn. "Caleb." She was beside him instantly. He tried to wave her off. "It's nothing. It is not nothing." She got his arm over her shoulders and somehow brought him into the house. For an hour she worked in silence. Dry clothes, hot water, clean bandage around his swollen ankle. He watched her through the haze of pain. "You've done this before." "My father," she said softly. "He broke himself often enough." When she finished, she sat back on her heels. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For coming here with half the truth." He looked at her. Rain battered the windows. "I don't know how to be brave all the time," she said. "When I stepped off that wagon, I was terrified. I held your hand because if I hadn't, I think I would have run." He said nothing. "And when I held it," she whispered, "I felt something I didn't expect." "What?" "Safe." He felt something crack open inside him. Not loudly, just enough. After that night, things changed. Not all at once, not magically, but slowly. He began talking more. She told him about her childhood in Missouri. About learning to bake bread from her grandmother. About nights reading by candlelight when money was too scarce for oil. About Anna, who used to sing badly and laugh loudly. He told her about Mary. That was the hardest part. He had not spoken her name much in 3 years. But Eleanor listened without jealousy. Without fear. As if grief were not a rival but a room they could walk through together. Winter came hard. Then came the letter from the bank. Final notice. If the debt was not paid by spring, Caleb would lose the ranch. He sat at the kitchen table with the paper in his hands and felt old despair rise in his chest. Eleanor read it quietly. Then she said, "We are not done yet." "We." Yes, we. For the next 3 months she became fiercer than winter itself. She reorganized accounts, sold preserves in town, bargained harder than Caleb ever would have dared, convinced the neighboring rancher's wife to buy their wool, took in sewing late into the night. Caleb worked like a man fighting for breath. And for the first time in years, he was not fighting alone. Spring arrived with mud, thaw, and one final blow. A fever swept through the valley. Eleanor was the one who fell sick. For 2 days she burned. Caleb sat by her bed with fear so sharp it hollowed him. He changed cloths on her forehead, forced broth between her lips, spoke to her though he wasn't sure she could hear. On the third night, she opened her eyes. He realized then his hand had been gripping hers so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Her voice was barely there. "You look terrible." He laughed once, a broken sound that turned suddenly into tears. "I thought I was losing you." "You can't," she whispered. "I still haven't taught you how to keep flour from burning." He lowered his head, and then, before fear could stop him, he said the truth. "I love you." The room went very still. She stared at him. "Caleb, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't think it could happen again. But it did." Her eyes filled. "I love you too." Not because they had married. Not because they needed each other. But because somewhere between grief and winter and hard work and honest silence, love had returned. By summer the debt was paid. Not all of it, but enough to keep the land. The day Caleb rode back from town with the receipt in his pocket, he found Eleanor standing in the yard barefoot in the grass. She saw his face and knew. We kept it. We kept it." She laughed. A bright, astonished sound, and ran to him. He caught her, lifting her clean off the ground. And in that moment he understood what had haunted him since the day she stepped off that wagon. It was not that she had known him. It was that she had known his loneliness. She had recognized the shape of it because she carried one of her own. That night, sitting beside the fire, he said, "Back at the wedding, when you held my hand." "Yes. Why did it feel like you already knew me?" She leaned against his shoulder. "Because Anna once wrote something in one of her letters." "What was it?" She said there was a man on a Wyoming ranch who had kind eyes and a tired heart. She said someday he would need someone stubborn enough to stay. He looked down at her. "And were you stubborn enough?" She smiled. Apparently. Years later, people in town still talked about the unusual marriage. The rancher who married a woman from a newspaper ad. The woman who arrived with no picture, no dowry, no promises except courage. They never knew the whole truth. They never knew that sometimes love does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, on a dusty road, in worn shoes, with trembling hands pretending not to shake. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can say is not, "I love you." Sometimes it is simply, "Please accept me." If this story stays with you tonight, remember this: your past may wound you, grief may change you, and loneliness may convince you that your best days are behind you. But hearts are remarkable things. They survive winters they never thought they could survive. And when the right hand finds yours, you may discover that what felt like an ending was only the road leading home. And now I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who felt strangely familiar from the very first moment? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories waiting for you.